They waited in the bitter cold for hours. Their faces said it all, sadness and shock, that such a well-known politician as Boris Nemtsov could be murdered in cold blood just steps away from the Kremlin. What's your reaction to his death?
Just disgusting.
Katya, who worked with Nemtsov in the 90s, said she hoped the tragedy would bring Russia's opposition together.
We must hope that everything will be okay. We need to be optimistic.
Will it bring everyone back together? The opposition, that's what we're talking about. We're back with the journalist at Radio France Internationale in Paris and editor of the book Why Europe Needs Magnitsky Law, Elena Servettaz. Thanks for being with us, and chief political columnist for Newsmax and White House correspondent John Gizzi. Thanks, guys, for being with us, picking up on our conversation about Russia here. And I want to leave off, we'll pick up where we left off since we had to go to commercial break with you, Elena. Go ahead.
So there is several versions, as I say. There is people who think that secret services are involved, but maybe you already heard about this Chechen version. But I would like to mention that Chechen version was made only for two people in this world, as our politologists say. These two people are, from one side, it's Barack Obama, and Angela Merkel from another side, because as you heard, Vladimir Putin told that the killers will be found, and so that's it is. But if you can imagine how the Chechnya is functioning, you will never imagine that someone will dare to kill a well-known politician just in front of the Kremlin and to walk around these streets, because there is a State Duma, and every piece of this trajectory is very well protected by police. So it cannot be so that they did it without any permission.
Well, let's ask John. John, what's the response from the White House in terms of the news of these arrests and this story that's been concocted about these Chechen rebels being behind Mr. Nemtsov's murder?
Okay, there was no official reaction at the White House press briefing today, where I've just come from.
Really nothing. They didn't mention it.
No, they did not mention it. They certainly covered a lot about the letter from the members of the Senate to the government in Tehran, and they discussed quite a bit about former Secretary Clinton's emails, but Russia in that context did not come up. They did voice concern about the continuing ties of Russia to the separatists in Ukraine. Now, it should be pointed out that Press Secretary Ernest did issue a very strong statement following the murder of Boris Nemtsov and praising Mr. Nemtsov, and the U.S. ambassador to Russia, John Teft, did attend the funeral.
All right, so, there's obviously some sensitive issues here that make it difficult for the White House to say some things with everything else going on involving Vladimir Putin. But I also wanted to ask you, John, about the movement within the U.S. Congress to provide real-deal weapons for the Ukrainian government. Where does that stand at this point?
Well, this is certainly something I've corresponded with Elena about and reported on. It seems to go stronger by the week, and it's bipartisan. Eliot Engel, the ranking Democrat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, is for providing weapons to Ukraine, as are virtually all, but I would say 10 to 12 Republicans on the House side at this point. Congressman Adam Kinzinger of Illinois was a lonely voice on this. Today he has many allies. So I can say without hesitation that the movement to arm Ukraine is stronger than ever in the Congress of the United States, and it's bipartisan.
Now, we know this president is apt to go it alone in these types of situations, at least when it comes to the negotiations with Iran. But is there any indication here, John, that the president might be willing to listen to Congress, even members of his own party like Eliot Engel, on this type of issue?
Well, I can't say. One thing I've noticed that the comments from the administration, through its press secretary and the president himself, grow stronger about Ukraine. There's a continuing dialogue with President Poroshenko. Vice President Biden just spoke to him a week ago. So I think it is a possibility, but right now the attitude is that when the action gets hot, keep the rhetoric cool.
Now, Elena, there's been some discontent here among conservative members of Congress and some of the hawks that this administration has not done enough. Of course, here over on this side of the Atlantic Ocean, folks would say that Europe hasn't done enough. What's the take from where you're standing right now?
Europe done enough, maybe, but there is two people who talked to Vladimir Putin not so long ago, French President Hollande and Angela Merkel. Of course, we can discuss many hours why they didn't sign this agreement in Minsk. There is no signature from Vladimir Putin, no from Poroshenko. It's just only so-called contact group who signed these documents. Europe doesn't want to have the war on our borders, close to our borders, and everybody understands this. And so the only thing which is we are waiting for the reaction from the United States. Inside of Russia, inside France, we do waiting for this response if they will dare to support Ukrainian forces. If there is support from Russian side, why not to do the same kind of support from another side, what that people are discussing right now.
Now, John, at the onset of that, there was some talk that we might be entering a new Cold War, so to speak. Vladimir Putin has said he's going to run for another term in office. Do you think that would signify maybe a new chapter in a new Cold War, or the beginning of the end for Vladimir Putin?
All right. One thing, several Putin watchers have said that he will never leave office on his own voluntarily, that he will change the law at the completion of a fourth non-consecutive term because he would be indicted almost the day he's a private citizen. I don't know about that, but I will say one thing, that relations between the United States and Russia are certainly at a low point. They began to decline during the Bush administration, and President Bush told me 7 days before he left office that Vladimir Putin did change while in power, and it's certainly a worse situation now. There's no talk of a reset or anything else anymore. One other thing I would add along those lines, John, is that Putin himself has never prepared any kind of a successor. And another thing is that in the European community, the extreme nationalist parties, the National Front in France, the Golden Dawn in Greece, UKIP in Britain, the common denominator they have is they are all pro-Putin in the clash over Ukraine, so he has a bigger amen corner in Brussels.
Well, the politics of Europe certainly color this situation. Elena, we got about, I'm going to have to cut it off there because we're out of time. I want to thank you both very much for your time. An interesting take on the Nemtsov situation and those new arrests announced from the Russian Federation, which no one really believes. Elena Servettaz and John Gizzi, thank you very much for being with us. We're back here with more on MidPoint right after this short Newsmax Now update.